There we go. No, thank you all very much for having me. Thank you for joining me. I'm sorry, everyone, that I had to move. This is because I'm a prima donna and diva. I do apologize to move it all onto Friday, but I do hope this kind of ends your week well and you kind of enjoy what we're going to be talking about. And today's topic from my side and what I'm going to be presenting with all of you lovely people today is that called Understanding Your Level Mental Mapping. This talk here is about kind of guiding your player, and what I hope for you to learn and take away from this is kind of who I am, what was my journey within to the games industry, so you can kind of learn from that and hopefully pick up on how you can best take those kind of principles and apply it upon your own journey. Next is, well, what is mental mapping? What is this technique used for in level design, and how you can take it from this presentation and apply it to that of your own levels as you move through, create your portfolios and into your professional work as well. And then finally, how is it that you actually use it? It's not just what we mentioned on how to do it, but how to correctly apply it as well. So that's what I hope you take away from this talk, and that you can build upon it within your careers. So first, we talk a little bit about my story. I do this not so much because I'm in love with myself as much as I'd like to pretend, but more of the fact to do with it. So again, to share you a bit of who I am and how it relates. So I've actually got now over 7 years of experience within the industry. I've worked on a range of titles from mobile to indie, augmented reality, and now currently AAA. I've worked and currently work at that of CD PROJEKT Red, previously Ubisoft, my indie studio called Oslo Entertainment, and a mobile studio called Free Online Games. I've released over 10 games in total. I've had different blogs featured that on Gamma Sutra, Level Design Org, 80 Level, all of that to help share the knowledge from what I've learned upon my career. I not only do that, but as previously mentioned, I also host a podcast as well. So if you do think that I have a face for radio, but like my voice, you can find more information there as well. And my overall role is that of a level designer, crafting the kind of experiences player will be walking through when they're exploring that of the world. So let's talk a bit about the role of a level designer. Some of you may not know what that means. Some of you may be, for example, looking to break into level design and want to know more about it. So we, alongside the environment artists, are the architects of the virtual world. We're the ones who kind of build the space that the players will be exploring, whether that be the more bombastic levels of that, say, in Call of Duty, or the towers in Angry Birds in which you need to knock off the pigs themselves. We are building the playable space, the space that players will actually interact with. We control the flow of the mission. Think of that as the pacing, when to have action, when to add the puzzles, when to have just a nice slow traversal beat alongside others to make sure that the overall levels and missions feel that engaging. It's our job to help guide the player, which is primarily what this talk is going to be on, as mental mapping is a tool in order to help guide the player. We not only do this, but we do actually script the event. So it's not only about blocking out the worlds, but it's us, as I mentioned earlier, when talking about combat or puzzles, implementing that through the script side to help, bring these ideas to life. Now, as I talked about, this is a subtopic of guiding the player. There's many different ways for us to guide the player, including colors, landmarks, shape, size. All of these and much, much more help to actually go into guiding the player to make sure that they do not get lost. Because if they get lost, then they become frustrated. And that, for us as level designers, is not what we want. We want to make sure that the player is constantly in that of a state of flow. Now, guiding the players has changed and adapted a lot within the last few years. When you think about this, you can think about, games becoming much bigger. And when you think about games that have released in the last couple of years, whether that be through Destiny 2 or say something of The Division, you see that players rely a lot more on UI to help guide them, to help show them where it is they need to go. But the thing is as a level designer, our job is to make sure that players understand where they need to progress without actually relying on that of UI. And we've seen that with other games coming out also in recent years, with Breath of the Wild or that of God of War, games are starting to not rely on UI as much. That's not every game. It's not like a new trend, but it depends on the game that you're working on. But it's important for us as our job as level designers to help make sure that the player always knows what they're doing and where they're going, even without that of UI. Now that we've talked a bit about that of level design, what's our kind of role and focus, we're now going to be talking about the purpose of, well, what is a mental map? What is it? So you can break it down and, like we said, hopefully apply it. Now, a mental map is not only just used for us as level designers, it's been used for that of architects, geologists, urban planners, and much more, but it is slightly different. Now, this is a great quote, which is a mental map is a person's point of view or perception of their area that they're interacting with. If we take this house on the screen here in the middle, you'll find that this is kind of like our hub, our base of action. And we need to know, or the player will need to know, that when they are going up north, that this is going to be a enemy encounter, that they're aware that they're heading towards danger. But if they head somewhere out to the east, then actually this might be a spot for them where they can gather supplies. And to the south, maybe there is another kind of bigger hub for the players to socially interact with that of other players as well. So this is allowing us to make sure the player understands how this is all connected, that they understand the distances or the directions connecting between all of these events. That is one of the big purposes of mental mapping. Now, why is it important to us? This has been a thing that's, as I mentioned, it's not just us as level designers that use it. You found that we've been doing this for generations upon generations. It's a helpful tool for survival. When we think of that, the hunter-gatherer times, if you were to get separated from your tribe or pact, it was mainly going to lead to that of death, especially when we were not at the top of the food chain. So we need to make sure that we understood where we were and where our companions and tribe was. And this is something that we've always done. If you think about that when you've gone on holiday or maybe moved to a new location, when you're first trying to get your feet and understand your bearings, you'll kind of take notice of what your apartment or area or maybe place of work is near in order for you to be able to understand how to get back home or to the desired location. It's important to us because, as I mentioned, it's keeping the player in a state of flow. We want to reduce the chance of people getting frustrated. And for those of you who may not understand what flow means, flow is that state when it's like time is just passing you by and you're not even realizing it because you're so engaged where the challenge feels right. You're constantly moving through the spaces and hours can pass by. That is what I mean by flow. There are some great books out there, even Genova Chen, who is the creator of Journey, the game called Flow, and much more. He did an actual thesis on this. You can, if you just Google Genova Chen Flow thesis, you'll find that where he breaks it down, and there's some other great books detailing more about the flow state. Not only in that, we want to provide a challenge. Even though the player may know where they're supposed to be going, we can still provide challenge to keep them engaged on their path, on their journey throughout our level. Not only that, we want to, as I said, reduce confusion, allow the players to be able to, when they are stuck, it's through a challenge rather than through navigation itself. Now, how do we, as not only players, but as people, create a mental map? There is a lot that goes into creating mental maps. There is even more than on the screen, but these are just a few examples to help you. We keep an eye on things for like signposts, odd structures, different types of roads, sounds, even colors of buildings, and how they're all connected. As I mentioned earlier, when you're traveling or moving, you will pay attention to the blue building over to the left, and just down from there leads to the main road, and start to connect that when I'm at the main road, it's not long till I find the blue building. So you start to put all of these pieces together to actually create that mental map inside your head. Now, this here is a great quote from Grant Heidebrand, who is an architect. He talks about the brain expects future events and imagines sets of previously experienced. So when he's talking about this, he's talking about when you go to a restaurant, because you've been to a bathroom in a restaurant before, you're expecting a similar structure in all restaurants. So it's the same thing that we do when we're creating mental maps. Again, there is a road, so there's probably going to be turnings, there's going to be traffic lights. We create this through previous experience as well, not just what we see, but things that we have actually previously experienced. Now, here's something as a bit of kind of like side topic for that of what we've had in terms of our, sorry, I'm just going to take a little bit of water here so you can just digest it all. Just pausing for effect, everyone builds up the anticipation. But this was something that I found very interesting along my research when I was creating this presentation, is that we as people have these kind of proximities around us to show our relationships with different members of people. As you can see here, we have the intimate space, personal, social, and public spaces, on how we actually keep distance between ourselves and, as mentioned, other people. I'm going to go through each of these and how this actually applies to our levels and to that of mental mapping too. Now, we've got something called intimate space. Now, as you can see around our little test dummy here, the intimate space is quite close. So when you're thinking about who you'd actually let so close to you, if you imagine my hand was a face and it was here, it'd feel really weird if we just met. However, if we are that with our partner, our family members, close friends, we allow them very close to us because we have a bond, we have a trust and an understanding. And that can be the same with an intimate space. When you think of an intimate space, think of a space that's quite safe for the player, a hub space where they can gather resources. In that of, in the Division, I'll show you an example in a little bit, but a way to help also make it feel like an intimate space is the props and the shape that we use. We notice here that the ceiling is quite low, reflecting on that intimate space of being quite close. When you have a space that's quite more, sometimes claustrophobic, but not so much, as you can see, there's still a lot of breathing room, but we understand with a roof lower that we're not going to be attacked. We understand that we are safe, we're not vulnerable from above. And then when you think of these pillars, we've got them as nice round edges, same with the table. All of these here help to feel safe. We'll talk a little bit further on shape theory in just a few minutes. But yeah, again, this can really help make you feel safe. In intimate spaces, I mentioned in the previous example with Division, we had these areas as these safe houses dotted around the world. The reason we did this is because, as you can see on the map here, with all this UI, you can see that there's quite a lot of activities for the player, which the player is probably going to be endangered or going to face some sort of trial and tribulation. But in a safe house, we can take our moment to breathe, that we can take that time to relax. And not only is that intimate space applied to something, say, like a hub area, but it can be applied to your encounter design as well. Now in here, this is a space I built for an open world encounter in the Division. Now I'm hoping you can see my mouse. Can people see my mouse there? Brilliant, thank you. So in the mouse over back here, this is actually where the combat will take place. You'll see that basically the civilians are getting raided by an enemy faction called the LMB. So one has already been shot and they are like interacting with them over here. So what we do first is create an intimate space or a safe space that allows them to understand and get recon the area, which here is by the number 1, which is this up here. Now, what we've done to make this a safe space is a few things. Firstly, is that it's a raised area on that truck. Now, this is something for those who enjoy building combat spaces. It's easier to shoot down than it is to shoot up. So this way we've put them at a higher plinth, an area where they are slightly at a more advantage position. Not hugely, because it's not, say, something 2 meters up, but roughly around about 1 meter high. We've then got this safe cover on the back here. And then we've got some small cover with this knocked over newspaper stand as well, giving us almost kind of like a 270-degree cover, as well as this truck head as well. Not only this, but we've actually created a frame. If you look here, by having these pillars and this wall here and further in the back, it creates a perfect frame for you to actually view the situation going on. As I said, this way, again, we're digesting, we're doing the recon before advancing. Now, what was also very interesting about this space was, because once you finish the area here, this is kind of it, the combat, it only triggers once. But you do have random patrols on this road here. We can't see it. But the most fascinating part of this was when we found through testing, is when the players were going to into some sort of a random encounter, that they, in this area, they would rush to this space because they've used it previously and they understand how safe and advantageous it was. So yeah, your intimate spaces aren't just that within the world, but it is also within, in a hub, but with that in the world and your encounters too. So now let's talk a bit more about personal space. Personal space, in my opinion, is probably the most common for that experience when you are creating games. Think of that of more kind of corridors. This is a 2D sketch of the old school level design in Resident Evil 2, which I'm going to show you a video of in a second. But for us, it's the most common space used. We can find stuff like loot and kind of more collectible spaces. Now, as I mentioned, corridors is one of the most common spaces for personal because they're quite tight. This is about 3 meters wide, but they can be used in many different ways to create different kinds of feeling. This here I'm showing you as like a window and an opening where it might reveal information and make the space feel bigger. But let's kind of show you how kind of 2 spaces, which are just corridors, are used in different ways to create a different feeling. So, right, so here is the old school Resident Evil 2, and I really show my age, everyone here, by showing you this. So in this, we're about to go through a corridor, a little foreshadowing, that we've been in multiple times. We've run past it over and over, so we feel kind of safe within that. As you see, this is about 4 meters wide, probably. But this time around, this time around, you can see that it's actually being used in a different way, where we are now in close quarter proximity to that of this monster, the brain licker. So now it feels more horrifying because we feel even more confined, because although we have some space to move around, it's not like an arena or something where we can flank enemies or something like that. So they've reversed it in order for it to feel even more terrifying. Now the next video is from that of, I'm gonna have to stop this for a second. Tell me if you guys can see this for me. This been okay?
We only see the presentation currently.
Cursed.
Probably shared program or something.
Yeah, give me a second. I'll reshare it all. Sorry, everyone. So professional right now, I know.
And that's what we're doing here, being professional all the time.
Okay, can we see the video now?
Yes, yes. Perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is Doom Eternal's first trailer. And this, again, you'll see is roughly 4 meters wide in total, but you'll see how they use the space very differently.
You may notice a slight change.
So this here, as I said, is probably about 4 meters, but by opening up this here, this space, you can see that it's all about showing what this world is about, showing that the player is in hell before, again, introducing it for combat. So that, again, is a different way to use that of a corridor space versus, say, something like that of more horror. Okay, let me just get this up and running for everyone. Okay. Can we see everything now?
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you, mate. So now we move on to the third stage, which is social space. Social space is where you imagine like a bar or something where you, friends, and other people come to socialize. In terms of games, this may be your arenas for combat, but also can be used for other areas. So this is where the player might enter their more kind of, say, core gameplay loop, whether this is a screenshot from the Division Underground, so this is where the combat's going to come into play. Or maybe if you think of that in something, say, like God of War or Control, this is also where the combat or the puzzles that you'll see come through. As I said, it's not just for that, but it also can be used for big games to allow people to interact, such as Ironforge in World of Warcraft. So again, socializing, whether that be through AI or other players too. Now, your public space, to me, when it comes to the fact of your maps, will be that of your overall presentation, your overall open world, where this space is not only occupied by the player, but other players or other kind of NPCs inhabiting the world. That is when it is public space. So this, as you can see, is how we use different ways and different spaces to communicate different interactions within our levels. Now, why this is important to us is it helps us understand our environment. Now, I live in Poland, and as you can tell by my accent, I'm not Polish, I am actually English. So I moved abroad for the very first time when I came over to work at CD PROJEKT Red. And this was, as I said, a time for me to start using mental mapping to help me understand where I was. So I first arrived, I was staying at this hotel. This was the Ibis Hotel. So for this, to me, this was my intimate space. This is my space that to me was my home base. If I need anything, all of my clothes, equipment was all over there. And I knew as I just walked down the street, is designated by these blue lines here, that I was going to a social space, which was this Galeria Krakowska, which is like a giant shopping mall kind of thing, which in case I need to interact or ask people any questions, I knew I could probably interact with someone over there. Now, one of the things that helped me find other spaces was this giant landmark, which we're going to talk about a little bit further on, in which you can see this was this Catholic church over here, which I could see from the Galleria as well. So it helped guide me in order to know where I needed to go to get it. But by having all of these spaces, I was able to create a map, an understanding of how I could get from one point to another in order to get back home and move through to the main square as well. So as I mentioned, it's not just for levels. We as humans have been doing this for ages. Okay, so now that you've got an understanding of what is a mental map and how it applies to that of people and that of developers, let's talk about how we actually create one, what tools are at our disposal. So these are, again, just a few examples. There's more to these, but just due to time, these are the ones that I kind of recommend and you should put your focus on for now. That can be readability, landmarks, vantage points, size, shape theory, and the others here. And now we're going to kind of break them down further in order for you to kind of get a better understanding of best practices from them. When you think about readability, we need to think about how the level looks. If you think from that of a squint test, where you squint your eyes when you're looking at your levels and seeing as if someone with either poor vision or from a distance is actually viewing your level, or breaking down further how each shape can actually attract. So these elements can really help. Now, this is a great quote from Clement, who is a great level designer over working, last time I checked, on Star Citizen. So he does a great article on readability. But yes, we can see how symmetry on the left here works. This is Wolfenstein. So as soon as we enter into the playable space, and here's kind of another kind of tip that should be kept in mind when you're building levels. When you're building levels in first person, it's better to kind of slowly introduce your level versus kind of sticking the player in the middle of a room, right? Just best practice. But if you are just going to stick them in the middle of the room, then by having symmetry, the player doesn't need to wrap their head around the area. They understand that the left looks like the right, for example, and can instantly judge it. As I said, the other one is keeping your shapes simple. Even the one on the left is more of the Wolfenstein level is very circular. So everything there is circular. So it's very clear on, again, how the spaces interact and connect to one another. With regards to readability, again, this is a great picture from Clement and how he had demonstrated it. Reduce the clutter. The image on the left, if there's too much there, the player doesn't understand where the stairs are or how it connects. But on the picture on the right, it's clear there is the stairs, and that's how we can move forward from it. So again, by keeping everything clear, it allows us to move forward. Another thing that helps is that of landmarks, also known as weenies, an object or a feature that is easily seen and recognized from a distance. Now, Naughty Dog are probably the kings and queens of setting up landmarks. If you've played any of their games, you'll see that either Nathan Drake, Ellie, Joel, all of them will say, look over there. You'll see some sort of unique feature of it, and then you'll slowly progress further and further to it, and you'll see it as you progress through their levels too. Now, the reason why it was called weenie actually comes from the term from how Walt Disney would try and guide his dog with that of a weenie sausage in order to get its attention. And then he'd apply this theory actually to his park, Disneyland. Now, there's great talk on YouTube, I think by GDC. I've forgotten the presenter's name. I do apologize. But there's so much you can learn as level designer from Disneyland. And one of the facts is his landmark or his giant weenie, which is the Disney Castle. Now, what you got to think about, what helps it is we as visitors will come through the gates here. And if you look even just from up here, the buildings here are very much more square and rectangular buildings versus what we said with what we mentioned earlier with the simplicity of shapes, and versus the more exotic shapes of the castle allows it to be shown this has more value. Now, he didn't just have it from here, but he implemented other spaces or other landmarks, if you will, around the park to help guide players, or so to say park visitors as well. Now, when it comes to landmarks, there are two different ones. There is local and global. Think of it as local, help you understand where you are. Global shows you where you should be going. Journey is a great example because you find a graveyard, but you never see that graveyard again, because if you wander back on yourself, you understand that you've already been here. But the mountain, which is where we are constantly heading towards, is always in our periphery, always in our view as we make our way towards it. So there's two very different ones from it. Now, geologists actually use landmarks as well, but in a slightly different way. They kind of have a value system to them. And I think this is a similar thing that maybe we should apply as LDs as well. Understand, what is it? Is it a local or a global landmark? If it's a global, we need to spend more time making sure its silhouette is very recognizable. If it's more of that of local, then it only needs to be seen from a certain area. What is the unique shape? Is there any gameplay or interaction with it? As I mentioned earlier, Naughty Dog seem to be the kings and queens, as I said, of these landmarks. When you think of the Uncharted series, there's always a landmark. And then when Nathan Drake actually gets to it, he actually ends up destroying it, which just signifies to the player that their mission, their job in that spot is now done. We as a player, there's no need to ever go back to it because it's destroyed. And as I said, we understand that through the destruction of the landmark. Now, the next one is that of vantage and decision points here. This is something I want to mention, is how we perceive the world comes from how we see it, right? This was another encounter I made for the Division. And originally this truck bed here wasn't working. But if you see the number 3, which is these two areas, these were sniper positions. 3 was going to be accessible for the player. You can also get up here as a player, but there will be an enemy up here from one of the waves. What I noticed was when I originally had built this level, no one was going to this point here because no one was noticing it. But when I actually had a position for the player to start at a higher vantage point, players would see it more, allowing them to actually take advantage of the situation. So you've got to think about this when you're giving your positions or building your spaces. How much do you actually want to show? Do you want to gradually reveal the info or reveal it to everyone? Imagine if you want the player to explore, only show some of it. If you want the player to kind of stay put and take advantage of the space, then you will reveal all your information so they understand how it is connected. So all of that will help. And again, it comes to mental mapping, because if you have different points to, we start from point 1, we go to point 3, then we as a player start to kind of break through and see how the space is connected, opening up different views, different line of attack for that of the player, and mental mapping the different kind of flanking routes for them. The next is size. Different sizes of paths can have different, value. When we think about that of a city, we know if there is a main road, a freeway with something with, say, 4 lanes, we understand that we're probably close to a very inhabited area. We're aware that we're probably going towards that where there is a lot of people. But when you think of side roads with small roads, 2 lanes, we probably understand that nothing is near. And that's communicated instantly through the side of the roads, because the fact that we're facilitating different types of people. This can be used in our levels too. Now, these are screenshots taken from Titanfall 2, and they were great with, again, yellow. We'll talk about colors in a second. But these big doors were often to help highlight to the player, okay, if you want to progress the level, we can head here. These smaller doors would kind of indicate kind of flanking routes, loot rooms, all of these to, again, help players figure out where they need to go. So when you're building your levels, people are more attracted to bigger spaces. So double doors will help versus, say, single doors. Now we're going to move on to shape theory. I'm sure most of you have seen this test. If not, I'll kind of break it down. This was a test done by a psychiatrist, and I can't remember his name now, but it was very early on where people were given two shapes, and then they were given two words, Kiki and Bubba, and they found that over 80% associated the words with the shapes like this, which allowed us to learn how we view as people subconsciously that of sharp objects versus more curved and soft ones. So when we think of something, a character like the devil or Maleficent, they're very sharp, pointy, kind of repelling us away. And it's no coincidence that the biggest child star, Mickey Mouse, is made up of 3 circles. And kind of square shapes represent that, say, of Carl from Pixar's Up as someone who's more stable, stuck in their ways and not able to grow. Now, this is great for character artists, but it can actually be applied to our level design as well. If you look at this beautiful grand staircase, you can see that it's almost like a triangle pointing to pull us up in this space. Oop. Sorry, guys, messed up there. And triangles not only used to indicate where we could possibly go, but can help actually reveal information too. There was a great talk on Breath of the Wild where they talked about a lot of their open world design was based on triangles. Because 1, it would pull players up to get a higher vantage point. But 2, you can actually see something, say, at the edge of the triangle or cliff, and would have to explore around. So it was a nice teaser to encourage that movement there. And if you think about that of corridors too, they're normally rectangular, right? The reason for this, and I didn't realize this, is because subconsciously they push and pull us through. There are no spaces to stop at. There is the destination and where we need to go from it. So that is where, as I said, just a simple shape to pull us in and out. Now, this is the Pantheon in Italy. If you do get a chance to see it once all this mess kind of cleans up, do check it out because it's a brilliant location that was impressive from an architectural point of view. But when we break it down to simplicity of shapes, you can see how it works. It has the corridor to pull us in. There is this giant hole in the middle, which leads us to the center. And then from this, we kind of move around that of the space in it. And by the time we circle back round, we're pulled out by that as well. So each shape kind of has an impact on how we move through the spaces as well. Look at this here. I've forgotten where this was taken from, but this hotel is impressive because it's very triangular, even with the lines, the shape here, pulling us in to where we should go. Now, next point will be that of color. Do check out what color theory is because there's a lot to learn from it, not just this, from the reds, the love of anger, the blue more mellow and relaxed, that of purple being rich or envy, and much more, because these kind of lighting tips can help, again, push and pull your players in certain directions. So here's an example in Wolfenstein. Oh, no, sorry. This one is, yeah, there we go. Wolfenstein. So you see here, we see this giant yellow light flashing, almost as if warning. And then you see that your ally has been shot, telling us to be careful. Then we come on through and kill the enemy here. You can see he's just drowning in red light. So all of this, again, can help indicate to the player kind of to be wary, where is safe, and much more to help, again, build those spaces connecting in the mental map itself. Oop. There we go. In the next slide, one of the things that we did with Division to help players figure out where they were and kind of where they were going is we actually gave each district its own kind of color theme through lighting subtly to help understand when they're kind of crossing over the threshold from one sub-district to the next. Flatiron being green, Gramercy having a more blue tint, Kips Bay orange, and much more. So again, it helps show and distinguish different areas, not just for combat, but also that of when you're transitioning in an open world. Now, this one is going to be my final point here, which is on entrances and exits. As we as players and as level designers create spaces that players constantly move around and move through. And one thing to keep in mind is allowing the player to understand how their world, how their level connects. From here, we can understand that the entrance and exits are here, that if I come through this one door, I will most likely come out of this second door. So it allows us to, again, even though we don't know what's in the room, piece the mental map on how it's all connected, versus that of, say, something like this, where if I can see the door on the left, I wouldn't be able to assume that it would lead to the door on the right, because it's such a long path that doesn't make really any logical sense. And then we want to keep the visual language consistent. If I come through a door but somehow come out through a vent, I would have no idea how that happened. Again, this is not necessarily a hard rule, but more of a guideline. So make sure it's clear that these elements are connected through how you come in and come out of a space. So this is where I'm going to kind of wrap everything up. So I just want to say thank you all very much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed and found this useful. So I've just released, as was mentioned earlier, a book called Let's Design Combat. I believe there was an email sent and you said you're going to put the links out elsewhere as well, where you can get the physical or ebook copy for it. If you do want to reach out to me with any questions, you can do so on Twitter, which is @MaxPears. I do actually have an email too, which is leveldesignlobby@gmail.com. And if you do want to listen to the podcast because you've enjoyed my smooth jazz voice, you can find it on the Level Design Lobby, which is available on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and any other place that you listen to podcasts. So thank you all very much.
So, Max, are you ready for the first question?
I am ready. I'm excited.
Okay. So the first question is from Paul about shape theory. Is this only related to Western European culture or found across different cultures?
So you will find that there are some different kind of shapes differently, but we tend to find that most shapes apply across the world. It's actually colors that tend to be that more of different kind of meanings across cultures and countries, but shapes tend to mean roughly the same in terms of flow and how we move. It's colors you want to kind of be aware of when you're appealing to different audiences across the world. Sorry guys, I'm going to try switch cameras in a second, but please continue with the questions. But yes, it should be more on the color rather than the shape as the issue.
Okay, so keep aware of that. And there are also plenty of great talks on color theory, which you can probably find on the GDC, for example, on the GDC YouTube channel, where they're sharing some insights into that. And especially when it comes to developing for colorblind per people or something like that, just to mention it on the side. Another question, which was brought up by Mikael, was, are there any differences when considering mental mapping for 2D, 3D games and for VR games, for example?
So in terms of VR, I have not worked in VR, so I'm unsure, because your VR levels right now, minus Half-Life, I believe, are very segmented because of how you move, right? But in terms of 2D versus 3D, you can apply this. If you haven't played, do check out, it's a great game called Hyperlight Drifter. And that there has some amazing principles of landmarks, different shapes, different colors, all from it. And it's an isometric view versus that of a 3D view. So to me, it's applied for any level. As I said, I haven't worked on VR, so I don't know how reliant it is. But yeah, it works for all.
Really interesting. I also heard that Hyperlight Drifter also takes a lot of tips and tricks from the Zelda series.
Yes, yeah. And again, like I said, and the Zelda has progressed from 2D to 3D, back to 2D again, and more. So yes, all of this can be touched upon. Now, some might apply more or less depending on the camera, but the core principles are the exact same.
So next question by Eva would be, are there any accessibility guidelines to follow in level design besides the color theory?
By accessibility, I'm presuming they mean for people who have, say, color blindness or something like that, I'm imagining, right?
Yep, she says.
Fantastic. So for accessibility, it's not just on level design to do this, right? Because this is the toughest point, but we've seen now with that of Last of Us, these different kind of vision modes you can have to help swap out colors for those that are traditionally swapped for those who suffer from color blindness. So that here isn't necessarily on us as level designers, but it should be communicated from those as level designers communicating with, say, your UX designer, user experience designer, to speak about that. So there's going to be other things that we have. I mean, different controller inputs and layouts will help those who are more kind of movement impaired. So there's different ones to help with accessibility. But in terms of how it affects level design, it doesn't affect level design that greatly, but we should be communicating that. If you do want a great kind of more on this, check out Celia Hoden either through her blogs. She joins me on my podcast, and also her book where she talks about this, because she was a previous user experience designer on that of Fortnite and how she came across that. So she's got some great articles and great information on it.
What was her name again? Sorry,
Celia Hoden.
Celia Hoden.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think she's got a book called, I think it's The Gamer's Brain. And it's early back in my catalog as well of podcasts, but she is definitely one of the best to learn from for this topic.
Okay, if anybody is going to search that now, feel free to post a link of that. Paul just posted a follow-up question to Eva's question. Is there a consideration for making personal spaces accessible for people with claustrophobia?
Oh, that's a good one. I haven't heard this ever really come up from it, because it depends on a few things. Now, there is field of view option, which helps to change that. So it might have a different impact for you if you're claustrophobic, or for that of someone who is, just wants a bigger field of view. But again, in terms of level design, it's not something we talk about. We do play on it if we're wanting to create a claustrophobic feeling. But again, these elements will be handled by that of your user experience designer.
Great point also with the field of view, said Paul. And especially if you have not looked into the chat yet, but many people are thanking you for the brilliant talk. Just to mention that now.
Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, if I just posted the link to Celia's website, so feel free to check that out. And are there any more questions by people? Yeah. The first question by Michael is, how did you come to work for CD PROJEKT, if I may ask?
Yeah, you may ask here, mate. Obviously, I can't answer any questions regarding Cyberpunk or what, the process of the studio. But in terms of how I got in, so I was previously working at Ubisoft at the time. I just finished the expansion for The Division called Underground, but I had seen that they were looking. I had two friends working there, and they put me forward. So I had first a phone interview with a HR leader at the time. And then after that, I did a test. After the test was reviewed, did another interview, and then was fortunate enough to get the job. But you'll find that the process for most companies is the same. And the reason why I chose to apply for CD Projekt Red was, so my first job in the games industry was making mobile games. And I remember seeing Cyberpunk's first teaser trailer ever. And I was like, wow, if I ever got to work on a game like that, I'd be happy. And then through circumstance, it happened. And, I'm a very happy man where I am now. So yeah, that's how it came to be.
Awesome. Glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah. Well, I said, make sure you've got strong portfolios, everyone. Make sure that, you've got an idea of what you want and what you can show, because that'll help you get through. I'm constantly asked about portfolios, so if there is anyone who wants to ask more about that, we can talk about it.
Awesome. So make sure to follow him on Twitter to be able to hit him up. And let me just post the link to the current jobs of CD Projekt Red, because they are also looking for interns or juniors. So if you're just finishing up university or stuff like that, that may be interesting for you. Awesome. Okay. The next question, you mentioned that for first-person games, you should introduce parts of the level more gradually, if I remember that part correctly.
Correct.
Why exactly is that? Are there any other differences between first and third-person player guidance design that are worth noting?
Yeah, so the reason why we do it like this is, so when you come into the middle, because again of your field of view, you're not going to see all the rooms. So the player's going to have to look left or right or whichever way you want to look to kind of take in all that information. And in a game where there might be like a puzzle or a combat, those split seconds can cost the player and lead to frustration. But if we're slowly revealing the space, I can take in, okay, this corner has a statue in it, so I know this is the right. And then I slowly come round. On the left, we have a water fountain. So I now know if I'm on the left side, there's a water fountain. If I'm on the right side, there's a statue. But you can slowly piece and understand it together. Third person's a lot easier because of, if we've got the character and the camera behind, we can see a lot. Even like something like Metal Gear, when you're leaning on corners, I can swing the camera around to see what's around the corner versus first person where I can't see unless I actually peek out in order to view that. So it's those elements. In terms of any differences, the biggest difference of all is your metrics. So building that of like your levels, because you need metrics to understand how big the door frames are, how wide a space is in order to actually be that of prepared for combat or just traversal. And this is going to change a lot depending on your camera. So that's one of the biggest. I think, as I said, with stealth, it changes a lot. I personally prefer stealth games in that of third person because, as I said, it's easier to grasp wherever it is because I can control the camera as a separate entity versus first person where I always need to kind of be looking and investigating myself. So yeah, those are some of the differences for it.
Sounds like it can be difficult if you have a game where you can switch between first person and third person.
Yeah, I think that's why most of them don't exist, to be honest. So it just helps.
Funny. Okay, actually, Fabian got a pretty good follow-up question for that because he asked, are there any rules for connecting the player spaces in certain ways? Since we now talked about intimidated space and stuff like that.
So, yes, it depends what you're after. You can technically have two social spaces connecting, right? But it depends the feeling and moment you're after. We talked about earlier at the very beginning of the talk about controlling the pacing. But you can have things like a great tip from architects is that if I want say we're heading into a grand hallway and I want that reveal to be even more impressive to feel how big it is, then you'll create like a small corridor where the space is confined. Maybe we bring the roof down. So we kind of got tunnel vision. Then when we come through the door, the space feels so much bigger than if I was like arena versus arena on top of one another. There is no hard rule or guidelines for it, but tend to look around you where you are. Look that most kind of areas have corridors separating it. You don't always need it. Like corridors is more of an example of different types of buildings. When you think about that of an apartment, before you get to each apartment, you need to go through a corridor or some stairs and how that works. But if it's in, say, like an exhibition room in an art gallery, you tend not to have much corridors because it's just space separated by walls and then a doorway, and that's it. So it all depends on kind of the space you're building, the pacing of your level, and kind of the interaction you're going to have, whether it be puzzle or combat. All of that can kind of build into it. So there isn't sadly like a guide for everything. All of those impact your decisions that you make when creating your level.
I think it's also really interesting what you mentioned, that it's kind of connected to certain emotions, and that emotions also play a role in level design in general. So maybe keep that in mind too. And funny question by Janus. Are there some guidelines and aspects considering a flying character or flying cars?
There will be. I have not worked on a flying character game or a flying car game, but there was something called Cloudpunk that just came out, which deals with that of like a flying car. So do check out that if you want to learn more on it. But as a personal one, I couldn't tell you. You'll need your metrics to be way bigger to feel like you're flying and stuff. You'll depend on, again, you can still shape things to be smaller if you want claustrophobic feeling to create that tension. But one of the things that you may want to consider with kind of your flying space is your movement. because it's no longer like a 2D platform, it's just moving on one axis. You're moving all around on every axis. So that's going to have to impact your levels around that. So yeah, think about that with it. But again, I don't personally, sadly, have any guidelines for that. I'm sorry, but check out Cloudpunk. That might answer some of your questions.
So would you say that playtesting, for example, also your levels may help to come up with that?
Yeah. You need to be playtesting like non-stop, because I understand why we get worried about like having it's only like of recent that I'm not as scared to show my work. For so long I was, but it's just part of the process. And the only way you get better, and this is something I think we as professionals don't share enough, is that the iterative process is what makes the levels that you play better. Because the fact is, you play the game, you see it in its final state, and you're like, oh yeah, this is really cool, and you think it's done. I've messed up my clicking like that. In order for, you think that that's how it was made. It wasn't. There is like loads and loads of iterations, scrapping the level how it started might have led you to the left, but now that's cut and you have to go to the right. There's so much that changes with each level, but keep someone there to play test, have someone new who's never played it before. All of that information will make you a better level designer.
Also, with sharing your work, I really like the fact that it's you really need to share something to be able to get feedback on it. And most people just mention that in consideration with art or drawing something, but it applies to everything.
Exactly, mate. Exactly.
Pretty awesome. Okay, feel free to post any questions. And let me ask now real quick, since we talked about your journey to CD PROJEKT Red, but what was your journey like to start with level design in general? Were you always interested in that, or was it by accident?
So my dad wanted me to be a programmer just because he's a software programmer. So I think that was always the thing. But I'm not that smart, as I knew very early on. So I was not good enough to do it. But it was... for me, I didn't know the difference between game and level design until I was actually working in the mobile company. That was due for like a year of experience, like my sandwich year in university. And someone finally took the time to explain what the differences were. And what you tend to find with the differences here, people, is the fact that game design deals with kind of more mechanics, but also numbers. You think about RPG systems, battle elements, you need to do numbers to get that. So they figure out all of that. You're leveling up, all of that elements to it. Your level designer, as I said, builds the space. And that was for me the big difference. Like I want to be part where you can actually experience it. I wanted to get my hands dirty and make a space. And that was the most appealing for me, the fact that you could actually go off and see it. So if anyone's playing it, I could point out and be like, well, that's my space. That's the area that I made. And when I say that, I want people to understand on AAA games, there's a lot of people that come in and help and change and tweak to make your levels again better. So my space, and knowing I did stuff with it, there's also other amazing people to help push it to the next step.
Teamwork is everything. And it's an awesome feeling to share something like a level with players. That's amazing. Amazing story also. Okay. Any more questions, people? Are you all happy? Were you enjoying us talking? When it comes to, I wanted to ask, when it comes to, let's say, you're doing practical work and really building levels, are you working a lot, since you had like one drawing in your PowerPoint? Are you working a lot with paper prototyping and stuff like that? Or are you jumping in the engine?
I recommend for people to do paper design. Now, again, people do it in different ways. Some just jump straight into the editor. Myself, I've done both, but I prefer paper design just because we always suffer that like blank canvas syndrome where we see it and we're like, whoa, what are we doing? But especially with, say, like say that of WC, like gridded paper. The reason I point that out is because of we use metrics, right? We really need to get a hand and understand the different kind of space you need to get like a nice feeling of it. So when you get in, you see a lot of, especially in Blocktober, if people follow that, their blockouts have that kind of gridded pattern on it. So I know if I'm just drawing on this, say just a quick corridor for this, I know that, the corridor is 3 meters. I know it's really shoddy, everyone, by like 3 meters, and then I can instantly translate it across to that of my editor and instantly not have to worry. And then I can tweak it, because a lot of people are put off by paper design because they say, oh, well, once I put it on paper, can I no longer tweak it? And their answer is like, you can. This is just an example of how to build upon it. So if you might realize and go, oh my goodness, this doesn't feel right, then you can change that there. But it's just a great starting point, and it's quicker to do iterations on there. I don't have to go in and move stuff, which takes longer than just redrawing something out. So yeah, I do a lot of pen and paper, especially at the start of me building my levels before I come into the editor itself.
Sweet. Mikael also just noticed that looks like good old pen and paper role playing.
Yeah. Well, there's some great map editors online which you can use to just for Dungeons and Dragons, but also apply it to level design as well, because they're so at the early stages so similar. So yeah, you can get some great software for that and just put it across.
Actually, just like as a little fun fact, there's, I think, a nearby game development studio in Nuremberg, or no, Regensburg, working on a map generator. So,
brilliant.
Yeah, just wanted to bring that up for people who are interested in that. Okay, another question by Fabian. Do you have experience with artificial generated levels and maybe some tips?
By artificial, do you mean procedurally generated there, mate? Is that what you refer to as?
That is a good question. Do you mean really procedurally or by an AI created?
Yeah.
Fabian, feel free to follow up on that. Yeah, linear. Okay, Micha just mentioned it. Procedural. Okay, he means procedural.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I do have experience with that. Division Underground was made with a procedural generator. So it was similar to that of Spelunky. We had tiles, but imagine the tiles in 3D. And this was really tough in terms of my experience at the time, because everything on the Division was handcrafted. So, you purposely built out space. You knew the player was coming in from north to south, these elements. But when it came to that of, say, procedural, we had 4 entrances, sometimes 8, depending on the floors. And each time the player came into the same room, they might come at a different angle. So it might have a different feeling. So letting go of the experience is something you have to learn, because you're not going to be able to create the perfect handcrafted experience each time round. So you need a good foundation of rules for it. So for example, our rules were coming in was when you first arrive, you had to have a decision point. A decision point allows you to view the area and just kind of show you either you can go left, right, up, or down, depending on the way your level is. So you had to walk into that first. So the player was never just jump straight into the enemies. And then the other thing was we had to place certain gameplay objects. For example, we had one which was like a deactivating power, like a generator. And we had to place that around. And you've got to, again, let go to understand that where you put the generator might not be perfect for players who enter on the left side, but it's better for those on the right side, and kind of understand you have to give up a bit more of that. So again, it's just letting go and understanding that, and then having good rules or foundations to build your level with not just yourself, but your team too for it. So that's one of the ones that I can go for to help explain.
Thank you very much, she said.
No problem, mate.
Awesome. Since we talked about paper prototyping and that stuff a bit, Joseph had the question on that topic. So what does your general pipeline look like? What tools are you using after your paper prototyping?
Okay, so I'll go through my whole pipeline. Now, there is a video I did on my YouTube channel where last year I did a Blocktober on an art gallery, which you can see just from start to finish. I also have other like Twitch and YouTube live streams which describe the whole process in more detail just after this question if you want to follow up on more. But my pipeline kind of goes like this, where I will get my level from kind of my mission designer, my lead level designer, telling me kind of what they want, where is the location that I'm after. And from that, I will then gather references. Now, this here is one of the most important things, and a mistake I made when I was younger, and I try to help young designers avoid it, is you need to have at least 50 images before you go on to your next step. The reason I say that's so important is, so when I was working on Division Underground, my lead at the time, Daniel Molnar, who is actually in Ubisoft Berlin, if I remember correctly, now, he wouldn't let me touch the editor because I was making a sewage area until I could actually explain to him how sewers work. Now, sadly, I've got such an extensive knowledge now of how sewers work, I don't ever want to talk about it again. But I understood the flow, where this level would fit in with the sewage process because of this. So I gather my images. From there, I use a software called PureRef, where I paste all 50 images in. And this is kind of where I decipher what elements am I going to follow from these reference images, what ones am I able to actually use and think are perfect to apply to my level. So again, even though we've got all 50, I might only use 20, for example, but I know that these 20 help to create my overall vision for this. From that there, I will then start to do my paper design. I will try to do 2 to 3 different maps, just because I know that the first one may not be the best one, just to proof it out, and then I can pick the best one, and then I start to iterate on the paper design. Not too much, maybe some changes 1 or twice, not too much. And then from there, I start to block it out in the editor. Now, if this is a personal work, something that I think people should be aware of is create a metrics gym. Again, it does that in my video here, where you just place, so I have certain characters that I will reuse for all my levels in Unity, but I have a gym which has the door frames, the window frames, all of these kit pieces scaled to the right size, which I have tested, gone through, make sure they work correctly, make sure the interactions are at the correct height, and go from there. But also I use it to help color code my level. Because I know, on personal work, just as an example, you will do the same for professional. But for the example of personal work, I know that an artist isn't going to come and do up my level, so I need to make it clear what these spaces are. But I have something like, for example, for me personally, I have dark blue with a gridded pattern is high cover, orange with a gridded pattern is low cover, purple is interactions, red on an NPC is an enemy, blue is neutral, and these kind of elements. You can create your own ones, but these here just to help, again, establish color variations so anyone who's playing it knows what the visual language is for that level. From there, I then block it out, iterate and iterate until I feel happy with it. So that's my overall process from there.
Pretty sweet. And thanks for sharing that. And so make sure to check out his YouTube and stuff like that to find more resources on that. Awesome, says Joseph.
No worries, man. Glad I can help.
People are happy. That's nice. good start in the weekend, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no follow-up questions, I would call this a wrap for now.
Awesome.
It was a pleasure having you for this live Q&A and or kind of live with everybody here.
Yeah.
And for the talk, it was a pleasure meeting you, and I hope everybody enjoyed.
Thank you all, everyone. I appreciate your time as well. Thank you.